Heya, this is Gracié Rodríguez, a student of Contemporary World here at TecMilenio, and I will show you what I learned about the Cold War. The Cold War was the geopolitical confrontation between the two world powers, the Soviet Union and the US, including all of their allies. They fought for dominance of the two political systems that each country held: capitalism, represented by the US, and communism, represented by the Soviet Union. The main characteristics of this war is that there were no armed confrontations, but only ideological dominance of the two economical systems. The Cold War is summarized as a series of threats made between these two powers and its allies. Here are some important events. On May 7, 1945, was the end of the World War II with the surrender of Germany. The creation of the Iron Curtain on November 6, 1946. Iron Curtain is a term used to describe the boundary that separated the Warsaw Pact countries from the NATO countries. The Marshall Plan on April 7, 1946. The Marshall Plan, officially the European Recovery Program, was the American program to aid Europe, where the United States gave monetary support to help rebuild European countries after the end of World War II, in order to prevent the spread of the Soviet communism. The Berlin Airlift in June 24, 1948, where Soviets placed a blockade on the Allied sector of Berlin to stop the population into Soviet alliance. Forming of NATO. On April 4, 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization (NATO), where 11 European countries and the US and Canada formed a pact. Forming of the Warsaw Pact on May 14, 1955. The Soviet Union and its allies in Europe founded a rival alliance, the Warsaw Pact, in response to NATO. The Vietnam War on November 1st, 1955. It's the fight between the South capitalist Vietnam and the North communist Vietnam. The launch of the Sputnik on October 4th, 1957. First Earth satellite launched by the Soviets into space. This began the space race. The U-2 incident in May 1st, 1960, where the United States U-2 spy plane was shot down over the airspace of the Soviet Union. The Bay of Pigs fiasco on April 17, 1961. The Bay of Pigs invasion refers to the CIA-sponsored American attack of the Cuban government in order to overthrow Fidel Castro, which led to the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 15, 1962. The creation of the Berlin Wall in August 13, 1961. The Berlin Wall was erected in the dead of night and for 28 years kept East Germans from fleeing to the west. The fall on the Berlin Wall, November 9, 1989, 28 years later, was the first sign that the communist power was weakening. Dissolution of the USSR on December 26, 1991. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republic was dissolved by the declaration of the Soviet Republics of the Supreme Soviet Union. This declaration acknowledged the independence of the 15 republics of the Soviet Union, following the creation of the Commonwealth of Independent States, ending the Cold War. Now, why do they call it Cold War? Well, the term Cold War was first used by the English writer George Orwell, meaning the confrontation did not involve the usage of weapons, direct violence, army mobilization, and the like, but there was an ideological confrontation between two sides, and that had the world divided in communism and capitalism. Now, about these two ideologies, capitalism is an economic system conformed by trade, industry, and the means of production, under the ideas of the survival of the fittest. These are privately owned and operated by profit and loss. Characteristics of capitalism are the private property, capital accumulation, and fully competitive markets. There exists a high degree of competition. Capitalism is the most used economic system in the actual world. This economic system was first proposed by Adam Smith, also called the father of capitalism, in his book An Inquiry into the Wealth of Nations in 1776. Communism is an economic, social, and political ideology which intends to establish a socio-economic order structured upon the common ownership of the means of production and the absence of social classes, money, and the state. This ideology is born when the two basic classes of capitalism, the proletariat or the working class, and the capitalist class, who employ the proletariat, face a conflict, triggering the idea of equality between these two classes by proposing social ownership of the means of production. This economic system was first stated by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels under the name of socialism with his book Das Kapital in 1867. Now about my thoughts on the Cold War and the two economic systems. I believe the process of the Cold War was, once more, the mere excuse for a country to gain political and territorial power. In this case, it was two countries, the US and the Soviet Union. Each of them had a point to state to the other country and wanted to prove that its way of sustaining the people was better. They were afraid of the other party winning the opportunity of using a system of living and sharing or competing that they did not approve. And when there is collective fear among humans, there is violence. But since there was no politically correct reason to use weapons, especially after World War II, these countries did not want to involve more chaos, although they did. I tend to think none of them was bad or good, but there are only two ways of making things differently, just very differently. As proof of this, we have that the two economic systems survived to our days. They are not fighting for dominance anymore, although most of the countries in the world practice capitalism, socialism is still existing. What I most like about the Cold War is the space race. This had real benefits to both parties and to the world, because we had a great advance in technology used to discover space and extend our boundaries as humans. Perhaps we needed a little pressure of competition to encourage effort. But still, we saw great advance on space technology during the Cold War, and afterward the discoveries are still taking our breaths. Whether it's true or not that the US sent humans to the moon, it's still a great motivator to do it someday, or maybe to do it again. ¿Qué países eran los líderes mundiales del periodo de la Guerra Fría?
Rusia y Estados Unidos.
¿Por qué los países que eran aliados durante la Segunda Guerra Mundial se hicieron enemigos después de la misma?
Porque eran de regímenes diferentes, uno era socialista y otro era capitalista.
¿Dónde se dio la Guerra Fría?
En todo el mundo.
¿Qué opinión tiene el público general acerca de la Guerra Fría?
Pues que era una situación muy peligrosa si se daba porque podía acabar con el mundo entero por el tipo de armas que tenían y todos tenían mucho miedo que sucediera.
¿Qué tipo de armas tenían las dos potencias a su disposición?
Sobre todo eran armas nucleares, armas biológicas y armas, pues las de guerra, cañones y bombas, etcétera. Pero lo más peligroso eran las nucleares.
¿Algo más que agregar? Ok, Sarita.
No.
¿Algo más que agregar? Espérate, déjamelo. No,
Sarita.
espérate, no.